Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Feeling Seen podcast, the podcast that talks about the movies that make us feel seen. And it is an exceedingly exciting day for me personally on this podcast. I'm feeling so seen by this guest. I'm feeling so happy that they're here. I met this guest, like so many people, honestly, in my life, via Twitter, and it was a smashing success. I was on a podcast of hers that we will mention here today, and before we even started recording, I think we talked for 3 hours, and this was during the lockdown, so we've been transoceanic communing and podcasting ever since. She is responsible for the Final Girls podcast, which is coming up with a new season soon. I consider her, Anna Bogutskaya, to be the center of British film media, which is something she will dispute, but I will continue saying as long as I am on my show. So the epicenter of British film media is coming up with a book called Unlikable Female Characters the Women Pop Culture Wants You to Hate. Center of British film journalism, film mind, film thinker, film curator, film programmer, Anna Bogutskaya, what do the people need to know about you before we get started?
Oh, God, Jordan. One thing people need to know about me before we get started, I am absolutely terrified because I know you. I've listened to so many of your insightful, incisive interviews with people. I am terrified to be on the other side of this conversation.
It had not occurred to me, friends out there, that I had never, because like whenever I'm on Anna's, I always just think of like that I'm on Anna's show talking to her, but it is interview structured. She is the one moderating and guiding the conversation, so it is the more interviewee dynamic. It had never occurred to me that in all of our interactions in these years and all the podcasts that we have done with one another, that I haven't ever been like the moderator interviewer of her. So this is very crazy.
This is exciting. It's terrifying. But you know what? If I'm going to let anyone do it, it's going to be you, Jordan Crucchiola. Put me under the Crucchiola knife, basically, is what I'm saying.
Let's all open up wide and show everybody what we're all about here. Podcasting maven, film maven, you've programmed for film festivals, you obviously written a book about film, you are steeped in the comparative literature of cinema. And you, with Unlikable Female Characters, this is a perfect bridge to the character that you have brought to discuss today. Who have you brought for us to discuss in your Feeling Seen interview?
I worry about what this might say about me, but I've brought Tracy Flick as portrayed by the great and very young in this film, Reese Witherspoon, in the film Election.
I believe in the voters. They understand that elections aren't just popularity contests. They know this country was built by people just like me, who work very hard and don't have everything handed to them on a silver spoon. Not like some rich kids who everybody likes because their fathers own Metzler Cement and give them trucks on their 16th birthday and throw them big parties all the time. No, they don't ever have to work for anything. They think they can just all of a sudden one day out of the blue waltz right in with no qualifications whatsoever and try to take away what other people have worked for very, very hard their entire lives.
I want to talk about 90s Reese. I want to talk about 90s Reese, pre-Legally Blonde Reese. And this figure that we see almost coming out of like a background of exploitation films. Mm-hmm. And this kind of being like, I feel like the last biggest thing that we're going to see from her before her career effectively changes completely with Legally Blonde. This is we got an unlikable girl on our hands coming from things like Freeway and Election, and I don't know how you feel about the movie Fear, ladies and gentlemen, but like a damsel in distress and a classic erotic thriller. Like, I want to hear your thoughts on 90s Reese as a foundation builder here.
God, I mean, there's so many questions hidden in what you've just said, Jordan, because on the one hand, the being a person who does not make movies but participates in the discourse around movies and all the other universe that exists around film appreciation, film history, film festivals, film criticism, you are essentially talking about a character that makes you feel seen or that you identify with in some way is almost antagonic to what we're meant to be doing. I'm all about the connections, but a lot of them have very little to do with myself personally.
Right.
So the real task of this podcast was a challenge. But to go back to your real question about 90s Reese, I mean, we have kind of like three different images of Reese Witherspoon, don't we? Because there's the early career Reese with the films that you've mentioned, The Freeway, The Fear, Pleasantville, Cruel Intentions,
Pleasant Girl,
Election
she's
to a
the
Point.
bad girl. She's the bad girl little sister.
Exactly. And she kind of oscillates between this sort of very 90s era of lethal Lolitas that existed in a subgenre of the erotic thriller genre. We're thinking about the Drew Barrymore as well of the early 90s with Poison Ivy. We're thinking about Alicia Silverstone. She also had that phase with... God, what's the one called?
The Babysitter and The Crush.
Babysitter
and
The
True
Crush.
Crime, all of which are about older men trying to fuck Alicia Silverstone and how it's her fault.
Well, they're all about older men trying to fuck Alicia Silverstone, but actually it's because she wants to fuck them so badly because obviously a 15-year-old girl has nothing else to do except lust after her middle-aged neighbor.
Exactly.
But Reese is very much in this era, very much in this sub-genre of thriller movies at this time. And then she becomes a rom-com star. Then she becomes kind of more of a fluffy, pinkier, high femme kind of movie star. And now in her current iteration of, sort of a full-grown woman, Reese Witherspoon, she's a powerhouse.
She's a mogul.
Yeah, she is. She's built an incredibly successful business, several actually. She's a producer. She has an incredibly powerful book club. She has developed a brand essentially that is all about finding stories, adapting stories that is kind of like a high quality level of production that you expect from her brand now. Very often she's not actually the actress in them. Sometimes she is, sometimes she isn't, but it's, it's the Big Little Lies of it all. It's the, the finding a book that will somehow penetrate through the unbelievable amount of content that we have to sort through if we want to find something that suits our mood on a particular day, and that's across television, streaming, film, books, podcasts, everything else. And she has really transformed herself into a tastemaker and into a kingmaker as well, because she will, through her companies, find those books. She'll land those very early options, and she will make them into hits. And that's not what you would expect of blonde, tiny young actress from the early 90s, like so many others. Well, you might expect that from Tracy Flick, though, the character.
Then were you watching those movies in your youth before you saw Election? So did you have a kind of recall with Reese when you were introduced to Tracy Flick?
I didn't. My first interaction with Reese was through Cruel Intentions. So my image of her was very much of kind of the good virginal kind of girl, with a slight edge because, without spoiling Cruel Intentions, she does do some morally questionable things. Justified, but still questionable. But that kind of was my perception of her. But I do remember this moment of kind of teenage focused thrillers. And I've always had a soft spot for them. I mean, Poison Ivy is one of my favorite films of this era, personally. But Election actually came to me first through probably Alexander Payne. It was in my
and was it in real time?
Era.
Was this you saw this in 1999
Absolutely
or early
no.
2000s?
No, I definitely saw it in the early mid 2000s. This is probably my film bro era, where I was essentially, Jordan, just completing the canon of things that I had been told by an anonymous, very male critical community were the films that I had to watch if I could call myself as a person with taste.
Of course.
I desperately wanted to be a person with taste.
Yes.
And I didn't realize that you develop your taste through your own personality and your experiences, and it's not like a tick box of things that you have to see. So I remember watching this film, and I was trying really hard as I knew we were going to be talking about this film to remember what I thought about it at that time. And honestly, Jordan, I cannot remember what it was about this film that sat with me. And I think as I've seen it over the years, I've probably gravitated between the characters in the same way as the voiceover. It changes as we watch the film. It jumps from Matthew Broderick's character to Reese's character. and it kind of gives them the interiority of the film. I probably had the same experience, because probably when I watched it when I was younger, I was be like, oh, Tracy Flick, that little bitch, she probably would have bullied me in high school. I would have hated her. I
in your film bro era, definitely hating Tracy Flick.
Absolutely, yeah. But then probably I hated her because I arguably was kind of not dissimilar to her in temperament.
Sure. Can I tell you my first experience of Election? Because it is one of the most evocative first film experiences I've ever had in my entire life. It's 1999, or probably early 2000 at this point. It's like I think it was like summertime, and like lists have come out, and like I remember like Election, it was just like a buzz, like people talking about Election. I remember reading like an issue of People magazine, and it was like, what are the stars' favorite movies this year? And so many of them were like, Election was amazing. And so me and my mom, I don't know why we had the house to ourselves that night, but we were like, all these people are saying amazing things about Election, let's rent that. And we don't talk about sexy things in my family. I am an asexual person. We don't kibitz with our mom about boys or girls or who. There's a fucking steel curtain between any of that shit. So I'm sitting on the couch watching Election with my mom, and it is the most uncomfortable movie viewing experience I have had in my entire life. We are both migrating so far to the opposite ends of the couch. I'm practically crawling over the arm of it to get as far as possible from her. And I'm watching it the whole time being like, this movie's horrible. Why did everyone like this movie? This is so bad. And I remember, like, I'm not laughing at anything because I couldn't even think it was funny. I was so fucking uncomfortable. And then it ended. And me and my mom like looked at each other. We were like, that was so bad. Like, I can't believe people like this movie. It was so bad. And then like years later, I watched it again. I was like, oh, Election's good. Election's good. I was physically incapacitated and unable to appreciate a single thing about it at the time. The movie Election takes place in Omaha, Nebraska, in a high school, small town high school. And Matt, like you said, Matt alternates POVs between characters. Predominantly Matthew Broderick's Mr. McAllister and Tracy, Reese Witherspoon's Tracy Flick. Then there's adorable himbo Paul, the captain of the injured like QB1 of the football team, so on and so forth. This revolves around the school election for class president. Tracy's running unopposed until Mr. McAllister, who hates Tracy, convinces the jock Paul to run against her. And then in his deep interior dislike for and resentment for Tracy, Mr. McAllister basically ruins his own life to sabotage her run for class president. Completely ruins his own life. And detail of the backstory, his former best friend teacher at the school, Mr. Novotny, had a sexual relationship with Tracy when she was probably starting either sophomore or junior year. So she's a 15, 16-year-old kid. And one of the first things you see in this movie is a close-up of the actor playing Mr. Novotny saying, and this makes, I don't even want to say it, but he said, her pussy gets so wet you wouldn't believe it. And I feel like I'm going to throw up on my microphone even saying that right now. But that's how this movie greets us. And that's how it greeted me and my mom. And I wanted to die. So this movie, like, you talk about, like, being drawn to things, like, with more of an edge on them. This movie's, like, edge cut me immediately when I was watching it. And I watch it now and I'm even still like, fuck, it's crazy to think about this movie coming out in 2023, honestly. Like, it's the idea of, like, transgressive cinema and sort of horror having its bloom, and, like, we're A24 pushing the boundaries of things, IFC Midnight Neon and all those things. Watching it now is even like, shit, this still feels like a one-off. Like, it's almost hard to believe when I'm watching Election. And Tracy Flick, what do you think this movie thinks of Tracy Flick?
Well, the thing is, it gets mixed up in my mind sometimes because I've read so much about the reaction to the movie.
Yeah.
And a part of this film's kind of mythology is that everybody hates Tracy Flick, right?
Yeah.
She's annoying, she's shrewy, she's try hard, she's a little striver, she's a little know-it-all, she's a little nerd, she's too ambitious.
Ethics are rules of conduct.
Tracy Flick. Tracy Flick. I'd seen a lot of ambitious students come and go over the years, but Tracy Flick, she was a special case.
Some people say I'm an overachiever, but I think they're just jealous. My mom always tells me I'm different, special. And if you look at all the things I've accomplished so far, I think you'd have to agree.
And then, everything else kind of gets lost in a shuffle. We really forget about that first scene, that line, the close-up, the way that there's freeze frames on her face as we meet her, where it's kind of contorted mid-expression.
Unattractive, unsightly.
It's all kind of uglified, and it's because we're seeing it through the point of view of Mr. McAllister, who is petty. They're both petty characters, but he is a grown-ass adult, and she is an ambitious teenager. And she does not know any better, and he does. And he's inconvenienced by the fact that her mother, gets the teacher who was having a sexual relationship with her fired.
Yeah.
He's inconvenienced by that, and so he decides to ruin
Not
the
legally
high
punished
school
at all.
election.
No legal repercussions. Fired.
No. Fired.
Lives to fight
That's
another
it.
day at another school district.
Yeah, continues to work, this time in a supermarket instead of in a school. But technically, he's still out. He's not on the sex offenders register at all. But the thing is that every single time I've rewatched Election, as I've grown up, I probably watched this as a young adult or teenager. I'm gonna refrain from calling myself an adult until like my mid-20s because
fair.
I think that would be fair. But it's the why is Tracy unlikable, and it's why Tracy is annoying, and it's her voiceover that generates so much tenderness in me towards that character.
Yeah.
Because it is her against the world in a way that we've seen this many, many times over in teen movies. But this time, her actual fear is justified. There is someone out to get her, and it is an adult with actual power over her, and she's not just being crazy, and she's not over counting the votes or over trying. She works really hard, she tries really hard. Yeah, she is annoying, but she's not a bad person. And there are people, bless him, the Paul character, the beautiful injured himbo, still likes Tracy and has no desire to hurt her or inconvenience her. Running for
like, Tracy's
high school
the
president.
best.
Yeah, but it's the shot that absolutely kills me in the film is when Tracy realizes what has happened and that it's Mr. McAllister that's behind the election fraud, the real election fraud that's happening in this film. She's devastated by this idea that an adult, a figure with authority, a teacher, and as a nerd, teachers are kind of,
That's
benevolent figures of authority. They're not, your parents can, ground you. They can yell at you. Tracy is shown to have a great, very close relationship with her mother, but, she's a do-gooder. She wants to do best. She wants to be the first one to be asked. She'll do everything right and kind of earlier and better than everyone else around her by her own desire. And to see herself betrayed by a teacher who she looked up to.
Yeah.
Oh, that's heartbreak that will sting for the rest of your life.
The rest of her life. No, that becomes a core memory that will inform how she approaches relationships with her superiors and her elders forever.
Yeah.
He ruined that.
He ruined that. And yes, he does accidentally also ruin his own life in the process. And by the end of this movie, you love the fact that that's happened and that he still clings on to, some semblance of self-respect, which makes him a fantastic character too. But it's the pettiness of them both. The fact that they're just as petty, him as a grown-ass man, as her as an ambitious teenage girl. They have the same edge to them. But with one... And the reaction to them as audience members and kind of by the press and how people reacted to it is quite interesting. It's like, he should know better.
Yeah.
And yet we excuse him so much quicker than we excuse her because she's annoying and a bit shrewy.
When you, like you said, you couldn't tell me what it was like the first time you watched this movie. What were earliest points of memory with Tracy that you kept with you? When it was like, that was the first time I really grabbed onto Tracy, compared to watching it now, what are the scenes that might stick with you? And are those the same, or have they differed?
I remember perhaps this was influenced by Election. Perhaps it was influenced by another movie. But the one thing you could not be in high school was seen to be trying too hard.
A try hard.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you could do really well, but you had to make it look effortless. You always had to do this thing, it's like, before a test, it's like, I didn't really study. I spent a week studying. It's like, oh, you know what? I'm probably going to fail. Like, I've not even looked at my notes. Like that. The anti-try hard persona was the one that I tried very hard to cultivate. And I was kind of academically gifted, so things did come easier to me than perhaps like other classmates who had to try double as hard in order to get the same grades. But I made a lot of effort, but very often I wanted to make sure that people didn't realize how much effort I'd made.
Yeah.
And obviously the good teachers can tell. They can tell when you're trying and when you're not. Yeah. And, privately they would call me out when they knew that I wasn't really trying. But I always try very hard. And I took a lot of pride in my perfect notes. And I transcribed my notes from, in the evening from one notebook to another. So they were cleaner and I could underline everything perfectly. And it was all very, underlined. And the other thing was, and I knew this early on, but I also knew that you could not show this as like a thing. I was just as ambitious as Tracy.
Okay.
And my understanding was that ambition was equivalent to hard work. So if I wanted something, I had to work very hard for it. If I wanted good grades, I had to work hard for it. And the more you work, the easier it would become eventually. Okay. But also, there was no election in my school. I didn't go to high school in the States, so it was a very different system, and we definitely didn't have anything like prom kings or queens or class presidents or anything like that. But obviously there's popularity contests everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
But the one thing that I did work extremely hard at that nobody knew because it was outside of school was, Jordan, I loved entering competitions. I would...
Really?
I would enter competitions like... If I could submit more than one entry, be that writing or drawing, I used to draw a lot. One time I entered a competition like 40 times in order to win a Barbie. And I was maybe 7, so this is very before election. But
that
there was
huge
no
Tracy Flick energy.
Very big Tracy Flick energy. There was no rule against, there was no maximum amount of entry. So I'm like, well, I have to win. What is the surefire way that I will win? Well, what if I'm the person who submits the most entries?
Yeah.
Surely they'll pick one of mine.
It's time for a quick break, but when we come back, we will have more with Anna about Tracy Flick and other unlikable women of cinema. Then at the end, I will have one quick thing before I go that is a shameless promotion for myself, guesting as host of Bullseye, so stick around the end for a personal plug.
I'm glad you said that because nobody says that.
Can I just say thank you to you for such a thoughtful interview?
Oh my God, yeah, I think you nailed it.
Bullseye. Interviews with creators you love and creators you need to know. Listen to the Bullseye podcast only from NPR and Maximum Fun.
Hey, I'm Dan McCoy.
I'm Stuart Wellington.
And I'm Elliot Kalin.
Listen, you like podcasts, right? Sure you do. Don't try and lie to me. You're listening to one right now, so why not try a different one called R1, The Flophouse?
And on The Flophouse, we watch a movie and talk about it. And then sometimes we also do other stuff.
It's all meant to be funny and fun, and we think you'll have a good time. And just to be clear, the name of the podcast is not Our One, The Flophouse. It's just called The Flophouse. I do a lot of correcting Dan.
The Flophouse. A lot of correcting Dan.
Welcome back to Feeling Seen. My guest today is film critic, cultural commenter, Final Girls podcast host, and the author of the brand new book, Unlikable Female Characters, The Women Pop Culture Wants You to Hate. We've been talking about one such woman today, Tracy Flick from Election.
Now that I have more life experience, I feel sorry for Mr. McAllister. I mean, anyone who's stuck in the same little room, wearing the same stupid clothes, saying the exact same things year after year for his whole life, while his students go on to good colleges and move to big cities and do great things and make loads of money. He's got to be at least a little jealous.
I noticed it was a little low for you.
It's like my mom says, the weak are always trying to sabotage the strong.
Did you have your Mr. McAllister moment of realizing that, like, authority wasn't actually always there to protect you, and that it was actually something to be wary of?
That is such a profound question. I definitely never had that with teachers. I was very lucky that all my teachers were lovely. And I had quite a few teachers that were genuinely inspirational and dedicated professionals who wanted students to be eager, wanted students to be keen, and showed me stuff and directed me to books and to music and to different possibilities for further education, like going to classes, going to exhibitions, going to after school courses and stuff like that would tap into my nascent interest that I did not know could exist in a world where people could have a life and have a career in those spheres. It wasn't all just, you work in an office or you're a lawyer or a doctor or something like that. Those were jobs, and what I liked was fun things that I like to do in my own time in the evening after school. Yeah. And they opened up kind of this whole world of, no, you can be this thing as well. That's a job that people do. But I think actually the really transformative moment for me was when I realized that my teachers were not always that devoted to the class, and they did not like us all equally.
Interesting. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
And that came probably from the very uncool thing of just having conversations with teachers because they were interesting and interested in talking about things that my classmates were not. Yeah. And probably an early showing of that ambition where it's like, well, what did you do? Where did you go to school? Or what is this? Or what is that? Or what is this job? Or what is this possibility? But I remember them not saying things directly to me, but starting to notice the dynamics between them. That felt like privileged information. Like I could see when one teacher really disliked another or called each other out and stuff. Or one teacher just like would get very annoyed or very disappointed. And, and I could see that they were frustrated because their real job was, something else that they did. And they just did the teaching to pay the rent. Yeah. And I thought, wow, okay, so you don't really want to be here, but you do like teaching me, so that means I'm special.
Hey, Mr. McAllister.
Not wasting any time, are you, Tracy?
Well, you know what they say about the early bird.
Yeah, I do. Good luck there, Tracy.
Thanks, Mr. M. I'll see you in class.
Yep.
Well, and to the work that you do, the work that you're doing now with like unlikable female characters, there is such a, from what I understand, I have not read the book that Tom Perrotta wrote that Election is based on.
Me either.
But from what I was reading about Tracy and various things, it sounds like Tracy in the book is more clearly seductive. Like, the character of her is more clearly sensual, perhaps. Whereas the Tracy we see in this movie is childlike. She has, like, Peter Pan collars. And, like, when we first see her, she is the first student at school. She is setting up her folding table to get signatures so she can become a nominee for class president. And she's sitting on a chair, swinging her feet back and forth in such a way that indicates to you they don't quite touch the ground if she, like, points her toes up high enough. And yet we meet her as well with the information that this teacher had a sexual relationship with her. We see, like, him taking a root beer out of her hand and taking a sip from it before he guides her into a bedroom. And I wanted to talk to you about, like, the tension in this character between her primness and her, like you said, her shrewiness, and, like, almost the raunchy elements of the story that involve her. Like, this is a character with a sex life. She was like sexually assaulted by a teacher, but like this is a sexually active character who participated in a sexual relationship, and everything about her comportment and her styling says she would be a complete prude. That she would be like totally asexual and want nothing to do with that. So I wanted to hear from you about like the double time work of that unlikable character where we have like a sexually active little girl who tempts older men, but also like the striver, try hard, perfect student who's just like unrealistically precocious, and how she's all of those shitty things we consider popularly shitty things at one time, and we are looking at her as a protagonist, anti-hero antagonist, I don't know, of this film.
All at the same time, Jordan.
All at the same time.
Well, the thing about Tracy that I noticed kind of with watching it most recently for this episode is that she so desperately wants to not be a teen.
Yeah.
She is precocious, but she's still a child, you know, and the movie shows us this through the scenes that you described, through her hair, you know, through the way that Reese plays her with these just, you know, like puppy dog eyes kind of constantly looking out, by just the way that she's framed. You know, she's a petite woman anyway, but the film frames her as like child size.
Yes.
But there's also these, you know, this voiceover and a couple of shots of her kind of wondering and pondering about the affair that she had with her teacher and how
that she very
was
explicitly does not see in this age in her retelling of it, does not see this as a victimization.
She does not. It's evident that everybody else does, but she does not. And the thing that she kind of recalls about their affair, the way that she calls it, is that they could talk like adults.
Yeah.
You know, so she absolutely reneges any kind of friendship in her high school. She does not like her peers. She does not have any friends. She hangs out with her mom. She loiters around the teachers. And she has this kind of relationship, what she thinks is a relationship with a teacher. So she is so eager and so anxious to grow up and to go out into the world, to keep doing things. Everything that she's doing, this accumulation of achievements, it's all just taking time over until she can actually go on to a bigger high school and then a bigger world. So, but she cannot actually see through the adult world because she's not an adult. So I think that actually that dynamic this time around, I saw it as like quite sad, if I'm honest. Like I felt really sad for Tracy because I could absolutely imagine, and I know there's some sort of sequel in the works with Reese Witherspoon returning to the character.
Yes, Tom Perrotta wrote an additional book called Tracy Flick Can't Win that Reese is signed on to star in, I believe.
Exactly. There is a sadness because we're so with Tracy as a teenager. We never get to hear her. We get a glimpse of her supposedly as a Georgetown student, kind of getting into, you know, this big limo with ostensibly a politician. And there's a kind of a mirroring of her once again looking up to an older man and getting into potentially dangerous situations with another older authority figure. But there is a deep sadness in Tracy that I think might emerge should we see her, meet her again later on in life, because she's so desperate to not be in the world where she is at the moment that she isn't really seeing how adults might take advantage of her eagerness. Because the image that she has of the world is so small and so naive. There is like the fact that we never actually see her understand or deal with the actual reality of that so-called affair. It's not humbling. It's one of the most empathetic things. It's the reminder for us as an audience that she's not a temptress. She's not a grown woman. She is a child who simply has concocted kind of an image of herself as an adult, but she's not there yet.
Bringing up the notion of the temptress, and obviously to your book with like unlikable female characters, and Tracy occupying so many points of a Venn diagram of unlikability that we want to cast off about girls and women. This movie presents, I feel like, an interesting consideration that I wanted to hear from you about, where, because obviously, like you said, the dangerous Lolitas of the 90s. What we have in a character of Tracy, though, like we have a world. We live in a world in which, like, when a girl comes of age and she goes through puberty, she becomes an object of sexual desire of men. And men have a way of pawning that off, the idea of, like, I was powerless before her. Like, you have the power, teenage girl. You control me because you're so beautiful. Like, I simply couldn't help myself. And she is not that Lolita stereotype in her presentation. She is buttoned up, and she is prickly, and she is cold, and she is defensive. She's nice to people, but like she has a lot of persona versus like interiority, like honest her coming out. And I wanted to hear about this sort of like damned if you do, damned if you don't notion of like girls coming of age, where it doesn't actually matter if you are the Alicia Silverstone figure with the pouty downturned mouth and like wearing the gingham bikini under Nick's window, or if you are an A student striver whose top button is always buttoned. The world will still make you the teenage girl who overpowered the adult man. And I wanted to hear from you about that.
Well, in the world of election, because this this situation with Tracy and Dave is kept relatively under wraps. Like you say, you know, there's no kind of police involvement. It's just a parent and school interaction, right? The teacher gets sacked and everybody moves on with their lives. But the world becomes embodied in Mr. McAllister, right? He judges her because she, in air quotes here, she got his friend fired. Yeah. Which is inconvenient for him. But yes, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. We see kind of the backstory from her point of view of how they got together and how they met. It's romanticized to a degree, but she is not the person in control right here. Yeah. She's not the person with a wife and a house and a job and an age and a level of maturity that's expected of you, and a position of power as well, with effectively kind of access to the public life and most of the day of this kid. But she so desperately wants to be seen that as long as it's one person who's seeing her, that the other elements are part of the package, right? So it's easy to see how that seduction would happen for a kid like Tracy, who has no friends and fundamentally embraces and understands her own unlikability as the thing I have to get through in order to get the thing I want, you know? She does not care whether she's liked or appreciated by anyone else as long as she gets whatever it is that she wants. You know, in this case, the election.
She's very fixed that, like, we get that great opening sort of bit from her about, like, you know, none of this would have happened if Mr. McAllister hadn't done what he did. Like,
none of this would have happened if Mr. McAllister hadn't meddled the way he did. He should have just accepted things as they are instead of trying to interfere with destiny. You see, you can't interfere with destiny. That's why it's destiny. And if you try to interfere, the same thing's just going to happen anyway. And you'll just suffer.
You know, when you were the high school trying hard girl, were you sure in your mind of your path in the way that Tracy was sure? Or were you just like, I'm faking it till I make it?
I think I was pretty sure, but I think every single teenager has the sense that they're the only one going through the things that they're going through. Don't we?
Beautiful.
Whatever that might be, it is only happening to you. And if it's happening to someone else, it's happening to you the most.
Yeah. That is it.
Tracy's essentially that, you know, she talks about herself, you know, what you need to know about me is that I'm an only child and I have the very most special relationship with my mother. And, you know, I am incredibly special and you should all know that. I have achieved all these things already because I am so determined and because I am so very unlike everyone else my age. This is the thing that makes me better. And what would make her even better than having an affair that nobody else is having? Although, you know, we don't know that. This, you know, doesn't happen in isolation.
Right, of course.
I think this is if this was any other sort of film, like there is another kind of election that could have been done that isn't done, which is the lethal Lolita aspect, right?
Yeah.
But we don't actually get that because the focus of the obsession is not actually by Tracy over Dave or by Dave over Tracy. It's actually by a bystander, a secondary character who's absolutely no skin in the game. It is all out of pettiness. That's what makes it a comedy. Because actually, everything you've described, Jordan, if you sit and look at this movie, or someone on the internet might have done this already, if you re-edit this movie to be an erotic thriller in the vein of Poison Ivy or The Crush, it is absolutely fucking disgusting.
Disgusting.
Right? But that is not the movie that Election is for us. It's a comedy. That is the backstory that we need in order to understand why another grown-ass man is so obsessed with this teenage girl, but in an entirely unsexual way.
And then we get, like, I remember when I just descended into a new layer of hell watching this movie with my mom that first time, is the scene where Mr. McAllister is having sex with his wife, and he starts envisioning Tracy's head on the back of his wife's head. And she is very, like, you know, in her Tracy Flick voice, she is, like, pleading with Mr. McAllister to have sex with her, and saying, like, please, like, using, like, polite beckoning language. And, like, when it is fascinating to watch how, like, this man who, like, repeats multiple times throughout the movie, like, how morals and ethics, and how wrong to his friend Dave. He doesn't report his friend Dave for having sex with a teenager, but he sure takes him to task for it and finger wags at him. Talking about morals and ethics, but, like, then he is having, like, erotic fantasies that are also still based in, like, hatred of this character in kind of every dark moment of his life.
Yeah, I mean, I genuinely don't think that's a sexual obsession that he has with Tracy.
Think so. I agree with you.
I think there's a sense of, I mean, I've mentioned the word petty a few times before, but there's a sense of repulsion for someone. There's kind of like an envy that he feels repulsed about in himself. And it continues, right? It continues when Tracy exits his life, and then he remakes his life in New York and is a tour guide in the Natural History Museum. He is fairly happy with his life, and the way that it's fallen out until he spots her again. And within the same chunk of voiceover, we hear Mr. McAllister, Matthew Broderick, kind of his entire voice shifting from fairly content, pretty happy to be in Washington sightseeing. He's got a big drink. He's cheerful, to just seething.
Who
seething
the fuck does she think she is?
Repulsion and envy.
My first impulse was to run over there, pound on her window, and demand that she admit she tore down those posters and lied and cheated her way into winning that election. But instead, I just stood there. And I suddenly realized I wasn't angry at her anymore. I just felt sorry for her. I mean, when I think about my new life and all the exciting things I'm doing, and then I think about what her life must be like, probably still getting up at 5 a.m. to pursue her pathetic little dreams, it just makes me sad. I mean, where is she really trying to get to anyway? And what is she doing in that limo? Who the fuck does she think she is?
And, you know, and the childlike way of watching this film has been like, oh, he's jealous because she had a larger path in front of her than him. I don't think he ever even wanted that. He just wanted to make sure that she did not get to have it.
I agree. I don't think he did want that. When we have his voiceover at the beginning of the movie and he talks about all I ever wanted to do was teach, and him I'm like, no, I believe this guy is not papering over like dashed dreams. This is truly him living his dream.
Yeah, he's living his best life. He's happy, but his obsession is to it's the reverse of a sexual obsession, right? Is I just want to make sure you do not get what you want. He wants to see that sweet, sweet disappointment on her face when her name does not get called as being elected the high school president.
For some reason, one of the most enduring images of cinema for me is Reese Witherspoon wrenching down on the button maker to make her campaign buttons, and that little angry face she makes when she's so tiny and determined. And then, like, when she finally loses it and tears down all of her own campaign posters in the hallway with the attempt to, like, sabotage, like, blame someone else and sabotage them for ruining her campaign posters. Like, and the monologue about, like, you know, some people didn't have, like, dads who gave them cars on their 16th birthday. And just like how the entitlement of this himbo gets to trump all of her hard work and dedication. Like, tell me about Tracy's rage.
Tracy fucking loves effort. Tracy hates anyone who is effortlessly anything.
Yeah.
Unless you were there single-handedly customizing 480 cupcakes. She does not want to hear from you. It's this absolutely obsessive approach to work as the thing that makes you good. Right? And I don't think it's necessarily rage so much as it is, again, jealousy. It's jealousy that someone else got something without working as hard as her, which is this very childlike idea that the world and the working world is a meritocracy. And if you work hard enough, you'll get the thing that you want. It is not true. And I wish someone had told me that years earlier. Like, Tracy is heading straight for a burnout. I'm surprised she hasn't burned out already at age 16 or however old she is in this film. But it's Tracy not being able to understand that she does not have the thing that makes her life just a little bit easier.
Yeah.
It's that you know how some people have the ick factor and you just hate them kind of on sight. There is something though about some people as well that just makes lives a bit easier for them. They're not necessarily the best at anything. They're not necessarily, you know, that eager to do anything. They'll work enough and they'll try enough, but it's just a slightly smoother sailing for them. And it's a smooth sailing that Tracy absolutely is allergic to.
How did you feel about the smooth sailors? What's your thoughts on the smooth sailors? Has that been a process of coming to terms, or are you do you have that I mean, I think you're just so cool that I'm like, well, yeah, Anna's got that thing that makes her coast past other people, but that's just a vibe. So, like,
Jordan,
what's the reality then?
You're one of the few people in the world who maintains this theory, but listen, let me tell you.
I'm not letting it go.
I do have remains of the Tracy Flick energy. I have to do a lot of work to just focus on my own lane and not obsess over how much more work or how much more or less effort someone else is doing. I think depending on what field you're in, the comparison of it all is such an easy rabbit hole to fall down into.
Oh yeah, the fields we occupy are perhaps the most exacerbating ones you could possibly exist in for this trait.
And, you know, you could interpret the Tracy Flick energy as both a positive and a negative, and I think it's kind of a bit of both, because on one hand, the absolutely dogged determination and the ruthlessness in the pursuit of your own achievements and your own happiness and making sure that you feel content and happy with the things that you're doing and the way that you're doing them. Beautiful, admirable, aspirational. On the other hand, the absolute obsession with peeking through the window, as in the way that Tracy does, to look at how everything is made and making sure that you are the person whose name is at the top of every pile. That is a recipe for disaster, especially when you work in the creative fields and you can see, you know, how much did this script sell for? How much was this book deal? Or how old someone was when they got this thing? Or how many articles is someone publishing a month? Or who follows who on Twitter? You know, there are so many different avenues for one to become absolutely obsessed with comparing yourself to someone else. That is the terrible side of Tracy Flick energy that I still struggle with, especially because of the nature of the field that we both work in.
So I guess my final question to you would be, what kind of unlikable female character, how would you taxonomize Tracy Flick in how you have considered this canon of characters?
Oh, she's a shrew. She's a shrew in training. She's too smart for her own good. She tries too hard. She's too rigid in the rules of the world that she's created for herself, and she expects everyone else to abide by them if she does. She's not strictly doing anything wrong, but everything about her is, and this is a crucial word, annoying to people. And because it's annoying to people, someone, be that the audience, be that Mr. McAllister, or someone else down the invisible life of Tracy Flick that we haven't seen on the screen, will just become obsessed with destroying her. Not because of what she's doing, but because of who she is. And I think that was one of the hardest chapters to write, because it is almost an invisible ick that makes people feel that way, especially about teenage girls and about grown women. You know, it's the Anna Gunn of it all. It's the Skylar White of it all. You know, Tracy Flick is part of that same tree of female characters who people hate, even though they're not the villains of the story. And very often they're the victims of the story. And yet we decide that they have somehow earned that punishment that they're subjected to.
Well, I'm glad to go out on that fucked up note, you know? That's a good end cap for the senseless lack of like for women like Tracy Flick.
Tracy Flicks of the world, we must unite. There's good in that little striver. You
know, that collective action, unstoppable, unfuckwithable.
It is everybody gave Jeremy Strong such a bad time when that New Yorker article came out. I was like, oh, he's such a striver. It's like, good for him. Good for him. You strive on, buddy. It wasn't
cool when we did this to Anne Hathaway. It's not cool that we're doing it to Jeremy Strong.
And it's not cool that we did this to Tracy Flick either. I know she's not real, but she's real in my heart.
Anna, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and taking time to talk to me.
Always a pleasure, Jordan.
thank you so much to my beloved, honestly, Anna Bogutskaya. If you're in the US, Anna's book, Unlikable Female Characters, is out now, and it comes out in the UK on June 9th. And just a quick shout out to other Feeling Seen alum book news. Kyle Turner's book, The Queer Film Guide, 100 Great Movies That Tell LGBTQIA Stories, is now out. It's out. You can buy both of these books. They are Feeling Seen co-signed. But now, speaking of cosigns of one's own things, my one quick thing before I go is about, I was recently, on very short notice, I was asked if I could step in for the Jesse Thorne on his show Bullseye to do an interview with Bridget Everett. And as I had interviewed her before for the Feeling Seen podcast, I was really excited to get to check in with her again because we had such a wonderful conversation about Rudy the first time, and she's so just warm and forthright and honest and kind. Like, it's such a joy talking to Bridget. It was such a privilege the first time. I was so excited to get to do it again, but really did not foresee that I would start crying within 5 minutes of our second conversation that we had. The interview is live on Bullseye now. I am so proud of it, as I always am when I get a chance to work conversations about friendship love stories and friendship romances, great and sprawling epic friendship romances. Anytime I can bring that into something that I'm involved in and find somebody who truly reciprocates with my passion and my love for that strand of conversation. And also, you know, when I get the treat of someone who meets me there with their own life experiences and how, you know, big, beautiful friendship love stories play out in their own lives. And they play out also in the show Somebody Somewhere, Bridget Everett's HBO show that is now in its second season. It's an honor, and I'm bowled over every time because I talk about it as much as I do, because I don't hear it in as many places as I would like. And so I feel like I need to keep beating the drum, but Bridget allowed me to go to that place with her, and in addition to being just warm yet again and funny and so much like gentle candor in conversation with her, I just couldn't be more pleased to have gotten to speak with her again and to have gotten to go deeper on topics we maybe like had to kind of rock skip over the first time because one has to have an agenda in the show. One must complete the interview. But please do listen to that interview on Bullseye. If not for me, do it for Bridget Everett, who is just big as life in every imaginable way. But that is our show. You can follow us on Twitter at FeelingSeenPod or send us an email at feelingseen@MaximumFun.org. If you want to follow me, I'm JorCrew on Twitter. That's JORCRU. Our theme music is by Andrew Eapen. The show is produced by Marissa Flaxbart. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher, and this is a production of Maximum Fun.
MaximumFun.org.
Comedy and culture.
Artist owned. Audience supported.